Hey, it's your girl Sadie's, host of the Black Millennial Mom Podcast, and I'm so glad you're here. If you're a millennial mother or father, this podcast is for you. We talk about the real struggle the parenting journey comes with, and these conversations tend to get a tad bit spicy. So this is a space where parents can be themselves and may use some colorful language, if you know what I mean, from time to time. So if your little ones are around, this might be the perfect moment to slip on those headphones and take a break for a second. Other than that, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. Welcome to the Black Millennial Mom Podcast.
You know, my son is 3 years old now, and with being 3, there's a lot of things that you go through. And one of the things that I definitely wanted to touch on is childcare. Everybody is dealing with childcare in the millennial realm of things, to say the least. And I know from my own journey through this situation, it's been some rocky parts, but there's nothing better than having a conversation with people who are dealing with the same thing and or actually running the situation. With that being said, my first guest today, I've got Monserrat. She's a bilingual businesswoman and she's handling things as a new mother. And your daughter is 2 months old?
She's gonna be 2 months and 3 days.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So you know what childcare looks like for the babies. It's extreme. My next guest, Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Programs for the Women's Foundation, Alison is with me today. Hi, Alison.
Hello.
We've got questions about policy today and we're gonna talk all about it.
I can't wait. I also have a 14-month-old daughter.
So you know what we're going through. Now, she is the director of the actual daycare that my son goes to right now, TLE franchise owner. This is Dreena Hill. Hi, Dreena.
Hi, how are you, Mercedes?
We've been together now for 3 years.
3 years.
It's been 3 long years, hasn't
Yes,
it?
it has been.
You've had to
came in
coach
the middle
me
of the
through this.
pandemic. Yes. You started a very unique time in history, so
Right.
thank you for your patience.
A lot of us don't realize, like, again, this looks different from everyone's shoes, from the actual parents to the actual franchise owners and things of that nature. And it's really important that we dive a little bit deeper. Monserrat, you're a businesswoman and you've got a new baby and you've got some reservations in regards to daycare as of now. And I want to know why that is, because more than likely it was the same reasons I had.
Yeah, well, there's a few. I mean, the biggest one is definitely the cost. You know, I have friends who are self-employed themselves or have jobs that have sometimes had to step down or stop working altogether because they're like, most of my paycheck is going right to daycare. So, you know, it's like a balance of like, well, can I just stay at home with the kids or put that all into daycare? And then for me specifically is just a bit of fear of leaving my baby. Obviously, she's so young.
Right.
You've heard horror stories in the news and, you know, I have a friend who just opened up her daycare, and the reason why she opened up was because there was a daycare that had fake walls where they would hide children, and
What?
you know they had, you know, because they get licensed for a certain amount, and they were
Right.
hiding and keeping more kids than they should have, so they had that wall, and so things like that, you know, sometimes violence that unfortunately just happens, and there's that reservation. When I found out I was pregnant, I was taking an entrepreneurship class, and one of my classmates was working to open up her daycare as well. And she told me, she said, hey, you might want to start looking into getting into a wait list right now. And I laughed because I thought she was kidding.
What year was that when that happened?
This was this year.
This year, already
Yeah.
telling you that you need to look at wait lists.
Yeah, and I had just told her I was pregnant. I was
Goodness.
probably a month pregnant, and I literally thought she was kidding. And she was like, no, I'm being serious. Like, you want to get on the list now because the wait times are just so.
I had my baby in 2020, guys. This is 2023, and we are still dealing with the same issue. That's a problem. That wait lists are still a thing where we can't even get our kid in, and now we're working, and we don't know what to do with our children. You mentioned something just earlier about, you know, the fears of all the things that you hear in the news about daycares, but there's also the germs. There's also the accidents. There's also the staffing.
Yeah.
And Dreena, you can speak to this and what you've gone through, especially with me, because I know I'm the mom who's always complaining. Dreena, what's happening? What's going on? Why is there still issues? Like, what has this journey been in the last couple of years of starting your own business like for you?
Well, we've been open now just over 4 years. We opened 6 months before the pandemic. And so, unfortunately, that's kind of shaped my view of the beginning of my journey into childcare.
Right.
But things have gotten a lot better. Some of the things that we still are challenged with, though, to your point, is staffing. So if if you're looking for childcare
I have the challenge to have staff available
Right.
for the space I have. That could impact the wait list. And it also could just be the sheer volume, depending on the situation. And so trying to then make sure that it's affordable tends to be that if you have a compassionate heart, you're not making much of a profit to provide the service.
And that's deep too. You know, talking about that, when my boyfriend and I decided to choose the TLE franchise with Dreena, we were so inspired. These are two African-American women. They've started an amazing business in Reunion. And we were like, yo, we got to go. But also, with that being said, we weren't prepared for what staffing looks like in the new age and how everything is not going to be pieced together perfectly. You're gonna run into some issues. Your kid might take a fall. And that's not something that you're used to. You're thinking that this is brand new business. This is top of the line. There should never be an issue. And I know that I'm not the only parent you dealt with these kinds of conversations.
No.
So from the standpoint on your end, is it stressful? Is it become too overwhelming?
No, my husband was just discussing this yesterday. We were built for this. I mean, we've gone through a lot of things that doesn't make this stressful. What makes it stressful is the multiple masters. So I'm speaking for me. I have to honor the state, of course. And the state, Colorado has some of the toughest regulations in the country.
Interesting.
Now, where that is a good thing for the kiddos, it's very challenging for us as providers. And then you also have the health department. We're gonna make sure that, and so there's no issue there, but you gotta make sure everything is safe and clean. And then of course, I'm a franchise, so I have to answer to my brand. I have an awesome brand, very supportive.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. But I often wonder about those who don't have a support of a brand. How will they navigate through certain things? So particularly the pandemic.
Yeah.
If it were not for our brand, I don't know how it would have survived if it was not for the state of Colorado and its support. I don't know how it would have survived if it wasn't for parents like you being patient through the crazy.
And it took a minute, Dreena. Now, you know, it did come off with patience at first. It took a second to get patient with it. But you talked about a good part, and Alison, you could chime in when it comes to the state and the policies and when it comes to some of the strictest regulations. How much does this affect the parent and how much does this affect the daycare owners? Can you break that down for us and what that really looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a good question because, like, all of us being parents, providers, I mean, we want our kids to be in a safe place where we can be doing what we want to do during the day, whether it's working or being with our family or whatever else we choose to do. But we also have to know the kids have to be safe, and that is where the state comes in with the regulations and making sure that there's the right ratio and that there are, all the different safety precautions that come into play. But yeah, they can be onerous, but we have to find that balance between safety and kids being safe in the day-to-day, and then also making sure the providers can implement what they need to. And I think, taking a step back, childcare and early childhood education is such an interesting conundrum for our country because it's been something that I think people have had issues with for decades now, especially as we've seen more women in the workforce.
Decades.
Oh yeah.
And I'm thinking that it's just a millennial thing. You're saying that this has been a journey even back in my mother's age.
Well,
because it seems so easy for our moms to just call in their moms to have the baby and or take it to somebody's house. I feel like it's just becoming 10 times more difficult as we're in our generation. I don't know. That's how I feel.
I think what you just mentioned is so many more women in the workforce. Now our kids' grandmas are working and, aunts, whatever it is that we used to depend on. I actually, the end of my high school career in 2012, I was able to do internships at preschools. Okay. And so I got to experience part of that. And even 11 years ago, there were issues back then too. The staffing shortages and things like that. And it's gonna continue. It's something that I think we're always gonna have to be dealing with.
And as my kid enters the end of the daycare situation, that kind of concerns me because Alison, at what point does it get fixed? Does it ever get fixed? Because it shouldn't be happening still. Personally, how I feel, when does this become a more easier process where parents aren't put in this stress, especially for the mothers who, are working? I don't know about you, Monserrat, I'm working 3 jobs at one time. So for me, it's a lot to have to deal with that. And I don't want the next generation to have to go through it. Where does the change happen?
Well, I think there's one part of it is, we've seen costs go up, inflation's rising, and at the same time, we aren't seeing like hardworking people's wages going up. We aren't seeing like bigger support systems like insurance, paid family leave. I think that's another big thing to come back to is paid family leave. Because if we had a better paid family leave structure, we wouldn't need as many infant spots if more people were able to take time. And then, you come into this complicated situation where there isn't enough public funding. We don't have enough money coming from the federal government or the state of Colorado or localities to support this really extremely important part of our society. Because it's like not only is it helping kids, get a good start. I mean, I'm sure we all see our kids being engaged with things, their growth. My daughter is saying her first words. Yeah. And getting to see her, childcare provider give that support to her, and it's beautiful. And then it allows us to be in the workplace if that's what we choose to do for our family, or have to do, because we also know in most families, you have to be working 1, 2, 3 jobs to get by. And then finally, the workforce itself. I mean, we know it's it's mainly women, predominantly women of color in the workforce. It's such an important workforce to be supporting.
Right.
And we just don't have enough public funding for it. It's not like K-12 education or higher education that has these different funding streams that support it. So I think we need to demand of our policymakers more money.
That's a good point. So basically what you're saying is that they're forgetting a whole generation. They're going straight to the K through 12.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And that's been happening over and over again.
And we never had, I think everything went so quickly that we never had this broader look at the entire need for childcare. Because you say you're going to be into the 3s and 4s soon, which
Universal
is awesome.
pre-K.
Heck yes, you're going to get some hours for that.
Well, thank God for that. Okay, we're going broke now.
But then
there's one silver lining.
My friends who have their kids going into kindergarten then have to pay for before and after care because kindergarten is 8 to 3. And
yeah,
so,
and that's what we're dealing
work
with now. I'm not ready for that. Okay,
Exactly.
you say open till 5:36. I'm not ready to go to 3.
Exactly. So it's I just think there is such a lack of support for women in our society. There's not an acknowledgement of having to work, wanting to work, and then also just having that larger 8 to 5 support of kids that need it.
And the resources to have it. Again, just hearing that the fact that, at the end of the day, there's no real funding for that era and generation of children. And the fact that we are sitting here paying so much to protect our babies. It's this pro and con thing that we're weighing out as a parent where, just like you said earlier, I'm so happy when I see a picture come up. I repost the pictures every time they do it. I know that my son's talking and development wouldn't have happened if he wasn't surrounded by the kids in his class every day. And these are the pros and cons I weigh. But also, I get really tired of when he gets sick, I get sick. Yeah. And now it's taking me out of work for a week. And now I can't go back because he's surrounded by little runny-nosed kids all day. So what do I do? You know what I'm saying? And it's not their job, you get what I'm saying, to walk around and wipe their nose 24/7. They can't do it for 20 kids in a room.
I mean, if you think about the multiple layers of protocols in place to keep the kids from getting sick, they're going to just get sick. If it's the way I put it, I mean, we have the HEPA system on the HVAC. Every room has their own filter, and this doesn't count the cleaning we're doing all day and the cleaning service that comes in 3 times a week, and just what we're doing in between diapering and all during the day. It is a place where you're going to get a lot of germs. The good news is those kiddos have really strong immune systems long term. Right. I mean, if you look at it on that side of things, you'll get to elementary school and get perfect attendance.
I love that.
Because you have all the germs and you're good to go.
Can we build that? Can we fast forward now? Because I'm still over it when he gets sick. I'm like, oh God, here I go.
That is the one good thing about it.
With that being said, too, the next stage in the pre-K section and things of that nature, finding good places and resources for our children. I don't know what's going on, Allison, but to me, I kind of felt like the universal pre-K thing was a lot. And there's still wait lists. There's still things. My kid might not even get into a selected school that's a little bit closer to my home. So it feels like we're never winning. Because we're jumping from one era that's really difficult with just daycares in itself for our infants who can't talk, at a very early age. So now it's pre-K where we can't get the kid in. Yeah. Now I can't get my kid in there too. So when will these changes come into play? When do we fix that,
So that the new State Department, the Colorado Department of Early Childhood and Universal Preschool, that was a really big undertaking to add the first new department in 20 years, I think, that the state has had. and an entirely new like preschool system. And there were, I know that there were definitely some like hiccups, and they're still struggling to figure out some
big
things.
hiccups.
But I'm really, really hoping that they can continue to improve, because it's such an important next step for our state to have universal preschool, and allow for kids to have more access to those years. Do you all take UPK?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We do
And
UPK. And for me, UPK has been a good thing. Selfishly, my building was designed to support 4 preschools and a kindergarten.
Really?
Back when kindergarten was
Okay.
not an elementary school, that was when my building was designed. So immediately when we were open, it was the first year kindergarten went to elementary schools here in Colorado. So I have this huge room, the elite room you
that's
guys call
right,
it.
yeah.
And that was originally intended to be kindergarten. So with universal preschool, I can get back to my original design, and that original design actually is a little bit better profit-wise for a business owner. And so the downside of that, though, is less or fewer spots for infants and toddlers.
For the
Yes.
kids.
Yes.
For the kids. It's the good and the bad of that. You see where that
Because
weighs out?
everything's a yin and yang. So if you think about universal preschool, I didn't have an issue with infant and toddler teachers into universal preschool. So then everyone was fighting for childcare workers, and childcare workers by and large are underpaid. So now they're getting more money
Right.
because they're in demand. So of course, well, let me go to preschool. So now I have one infant room that I have not been able to staff most of this 2023.
Right.
I have 10 available infant spots, and I cannot get staff to cover that room.
Yeah.
But that room used to be a preschool room. I converted it because of the demand during the pandemic. State granted those funds. Now I can't get it staffed.
So basically
been
it's an empty room.
It was staffed for 6 months. So now do I wait, or do I convert it back to preschool? Because now with universal preschool, I have a lot of demand for preschool.
Right.
And this way our neighbors don't have to be turned away, because I have plenty of space.
Right.
So, Alison, you mentioned demanding from our policymakers. What is the best way to do that?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think at the state level, the state has a lot of oversight over childcare, and I think them hearing from it, so like your state senator, your state representative, figuring out who they are, which you can do on the Colorado General Assembly's website, and contacting them and just tell them, like, I am, a new mom. I care deeply about childcare in our state, and I think you should make sure that there's more funding that goes towards it, is the number one thing you can do. And then also at the federal level. So during the pandemic, there was a huge influx of federal money towards childcare, and it just ran out earlier this year.
Really?
And because of, they still do some funding, but like the larger pandemic funding, and it is causing, providers and centers and home-based cares to close, or home-based centers to close. And it's impacting the workforce, because then people are losing jobs. I mean, it's impacting families. And so the federal, our state, or our senators and our representatives at the federal level, I think also really need to hear how much we as Coloradans care and how they should prioritize it. And like we all know, what's happening at the federal level is kind of a hot mess.
A big hot mess. Should we go with like picket signs? Me and Mo say just go striking, because the Capitol needs to hear from us. And sometimes I feel like the letter is not getting across the right way. So how should we be going about that?
I completely understand where you're coming from. And honestly, I've seen conversations around the world of people being like, women should go on strike. Like, we need to show how important these things are. I mean, whether it's like access to childcare or access to, reproductive health, rights, and justice. I mean, the paid family leave, like the list goes on. So, I mean, I would be there with you. If you want to go do it, let's do it.
Make sure you're in the hood too. That way they don't see your face.
But also, I think, there are ways you can contact your elected officials at the state and federal level and telling them your personal story. I mean, like talking about how important childcare is to you, or how you have questions about regulation. And at the state and federal level, it's really important, because our state obviously has a lot of oversight over the regulation and what happens, but the federal level is where a lot of the big money comes from. And so we need to make sure we can get more money here in Colorado. We need more public funding for childcare.
And that's it, more money. The one part that I definitely want to make mention of is I want to talk staffing really quick.
Yes.
In the actual, and this is in home care, and this is also in daycares like yourselves. what I've seen, and you know I've seen it firsthand, is the change of what that looks like. Our generation, our moms, our grandmas, we would see them with the infants, and probably like around my son's age, at 2-3 level. Now I'm seeing a lot of this younger generation, these, the younger ones than us, in and out. They're in, they're out. And the ones from our mother's days don't want to be there like how they used to be there anymore. It looks completely different. And I think this is really important as we talk to mothers out there, fathers out there, to understand that when you're going into these daycares and you're possibly putting your child in, the scenario might not look like how it looked back when your mom's age group was.
No.
Talk about what that looks like as far as in staffing with the new generation of kids and our mothers and fathers who are in there that don't want to do it anymore. They've had enough.
No, I can definitely speak to it. By coincidence, my first job ever was in childcare.
Wow.
And this was back in 1988, so I'm dating myself. And so back then, the teenagers, we were just there after school.
Right.
Like there was like no young people. We were there to help out.
That's it.
Like 3 to 6, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so now I have a full-time teacher who graduated early and just turned 18. She's been with me a year already. So there's just a different landscape since the pandemic. My understanding is we've lost a lot of folks who just got burned out, similar to healthcare providers during the pandemic. A lot of childcare providers were burnt out before the pandemic because there's a big disparity between what wages that they earn and really what they should be receiving.
It was a money thing for them.
Money thing and then conditions. So when you have the restrictions, good restrictions for staffing, for licensing, the Colorado regulations are the same thing that will make it a little difficult for an owner to provide work-life balance.
Yeah.
If Kyrie needs to stay till 5:30 because you maybe come at 5 o'clock normally,
Right.
and let's just say his teacher gets off at 5 o'clock, but you're running late. She can't leave.
Yeah, she's stuck there with
She's
us.
stuck there. So now that keeps happening.
Okay.
What am I supposed to do? You're paying for the service to 6 o'clock. You're doing nothing wrong. I ought not tell you to hurry up and get there so my teacher doesn't get upset and quit. But if this continues, that will be a frustration that if I can't staff around it, ultimately could lead to dissatisfaction and quitting. So we've gotten some things in place to smooth that out, but a lot of it is wages. We pay the most on the block. For people entry level, we get them trained. We make sure they have everything they need. But a lot of places aren't able to do that. The smaller mom and pops aren't able to do that. So it becomes a challenge, really.
You said a good thing for the wages, and that's one thing that I never really understood. Is it the children? Is it the wages? Or is it just the kids?
As far as
why the turnover is happening so much, because even before we got to you, Dreena, we had the same down the block. The turnover of the staffing was happening every single month, and even in our hard parts of when you were getting things in order, it was the same structure. Every month we're getting new teachers. We can't even. It's so bad we can't even keep up with the names of the teachers no more. You know what I'm saying? And that's how good and satisfying is that for a child. You get what I'm saying? When they're like, I'm like, hey, Kyrie, who is your teacher today? I don't know. You know, those are the things that can scare a parent, and more so gets you more concerned about what that looks like, you know?
It definitely was the case during the pandemic. You started right after, you had him during, you started right after. So if you were to start today, you have a different experience.
Right, of course.
The teachers are back hanging around. But honestly, depending on where you were, depending on the landscape. Here in Colorado, there was a lot of resource available for people to stay home. If you were one of those folks who were on the lower end of the wage scale, it was cheaper to stay home than to work.
Yeah,
so
true.
Then now I'm in the situation where I have to do what I have to do to keep the doors open. So my family was there. We were hiring folks. Remember, the kids were home from high school, so we're working around their schedules because they're working remotely. I mean, we're doing what we have to do to survive. So when we went to a model of free childcare to attract people, we moved away from that now, and we have a better wage with a 50% discount. But a lot of it's leadership. Yeah. And honestly, childcare has a bit of a gap. The education that we have, the state of Colorado has great education to get people prepared for leadership, but that hands-on training every day for years, the things that happen in the corporate environment, in other industries, they don't get that. You're like, from classroom to leadership, there's a big gap in soft skills that are missing.
Monserrat, do you hear that too from your friends who are doing it? Are they dealing with a leadership and staffing situation too?
I think definitely the staffing. So I come from Colorado Springs, and what I hear there a lot is it's a childcare desert.
Ooh.
So there's just not enough childcares.
A desert out there in the
A
Springs?
childcare desert. That's what I've heard many times. And
Technically,
so
we're in the desert.
God.
yeah, and so there's not enough childcares and a lot of children. So part of that will sometimes be the staffing, the not enough, just not enough room for all of the kids.
I mean, during the pandemic, the staffing, they were going from center to center to get, who gave the most money. And I finally just drew a line in the sand and jumped up. But now I have to recoup those costs from the parents.
Right.
Do you see? So it's a yin and yang. So there are some things I can look at. For example, property taxes is one of my big things where I'm like, hey, if we can make it where the child care providers have some sort of classification, where even if we're for profit, we're not making enough profit to pay the abundant amount of property taxes that we have to, but that right there, I can probably reduce my tuition almost $10,000 a month.
Wow.
That's huge.
See? And the government didn't have to give me anything.
Yeah.
They just took something away.
That quickly. Wow.
So to things like that, there are options, but I mean, most days we spend just trying to stay above water,
Right.
not necessarily digging into those things. So that's why we participate with policy groups.
like an
They're
endless
advocating
cycle.
for us.
It's a never-ending cycle.
It is a vicious cycle.
It really
It
is.
really is.
And this is really, I think that's the point of this for me, is to really have this conversation, because I think that we get, as a parent, myself, I get in my trap as this is the mom and this is how it should be looking, but I never take a second to really hear other standpoints. And that's really what's gonna play a huge role for the next generation of parents to prepare themselves and to also have these resources. As things change, who can we go to? And it might not look like a letter from me, Allison. I might have to go on strike down there.
Yes, I love it. I'm here for it. I'm here
Just
for
saying, you
it.
might see me down there, but this is a really important conversation, and with more resources, hopefully we will gain the knowledge that we need to be able to really rise up and have the understanding that we need to be able to raise our kids the way we want to see it done.
I appreciate you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Black Millennial Mom Podcast. And the conversation doesn't have to end here. Reach out on any of your favorite social media platforms by searching for @YourGirlSadies. You can find the Black Millennial Mom Podcast on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. And be sure to let us know what you think by leaving us a comment below.